Whether you want to play or just listen to Baroque keyboard music, Handel, Bach, Telemann, etc., it seems like there's this battle. You have a choice between piano or harpsichord. You've got pianists on the one side, and then the historically informed performers on the other side insisting on harpsichord. And they can argue about this forever, but maybe it isn't just one or the other. I'm going to talk about this Baroque battle, but first what you should know is that there are actually a lot of choices from the Baroque period for keyboard instruments. You, of course, have the harpsichord, but you will also have the clavichord, the spinet, the virginal, the organ, and those seem to be ignored a lot of the time. And yes, it is true that for some of the Baroque period, you do have the piano as a choice. It was introduced in the first decade of the 1700s, but this instrument is very different from what we know today. It was much more delicate, quieter, and even a little bit unpredictable, and it was called a fortepiano back then. There are fortepianos now, mostly reconstructions, and they are a choice for this sort of music, but it doesn't really enter into this grand battle for some reason. So with the fortepiano not heard that often, and the other keyboard instruments I mentioned not coming into the conversation, why does the argument always seem to be between the piano and the harpsichord? Let's start with the harpsichord. First of all, it's a sound that even today we're pretty familiar with. And it's definitely a sound that composers of that day knew very well. It's also not as taxing on the hands to play. There's no dynamics. To get those dynamics, you have to switch to different registers, and the ornamentation makes a lot of sense. The harpsichord is also a natural choice for a lot of people because it was repopularized by Wanda Landowska, and she had a very different sort of harpsichord. Some of the recordings of it make it sound very tinny and overly loud, but for all those faults, she did really make it a great choice and repopularize the idea of playing these things on the harpsichord. Well, if the harpsichord is such a natural choice, what are the arguments against it? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that you can't do dynamics in the way that we're used to, that you can do them with a grand piano, with the gradual crescendos and decrescendos. And people will say, well, that wasn't done in the Baroque era, but that's not true. We know that they did that with instruments that could, like string instruments and wind instruments. You have to simulate that on the harpsichord by changing registers, pulling out stops, or just in your timing. And the other issue with the harpsichord is that it just wasn't built for modern concert halls. It can literally sound distant. A little harpsichord in a big concert hall is a quiet instrument. And it can sound distant to some people in time. It doesn't always align with our expectations of music now that hundreds of years have passed. So to some people, it just doesn't speak to them the way the piano does. So for those hardcore, historically informed performance advocates, it's always the moral and upright choice. But if it isn't speaking to you, maybe it isn't the best choice. Okay, what about the argument for the piano? Well, the modern piano is an instrument that works well on a modern concert stage. It has a much wider range of dynamics, plus you can make those gradual crescendos and decrescendos. It has a sustain pedal, and you can argue it has more timbral variety as well. Another thing about it is, contrary to what some people think, I believe that if you're a good performer, you can actually make counterpoint clearer on the modern piano because of those timbral differences. But that very advantage leads to the arguments against the piano. Among them are the overuse of the sustain pedal. When you do that, you blur the lines and actually make the counterpoint much less clear. When pianists play Baroque music on the piano, they tend to bring in their romantic approach, which really isn't correct or even the best approach for Baroque music. I remember that when I went to school, that concern was so big that most teachers had their students play things like Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier with their foot completely off the pedals, no sustain pedal at all. The point of that is to make sure that you can create the counterpoint very clearly with just the use of your hands and no cheating with the sustain pedal. Problem with that is then you get a very dry piano performance of counterpoint, and these composers don't speak to modern audiences that way either. So I think the answer there is not that pianos ruin Baroque music. It's pianists who ruin it if they're not careful. So it seems to me that this Baroque battle can be summarized as play the harpsichord if you want to be historically faithful, play the piano if you want to be musically persuasive. But with all these instruments, in addition to those two, the virginal, the clavichord, the spinet, the organ, why does it just boil down to piano and harpsichord? I'm not sure I have an answer to why the controversy is framed that way, but I do have a good suggestion for those of you who want to play it or just enjoy it, and that is listen to the same music on all those different instruments. And why? Because you may find that different performers speak to you in different ways on these different instruments. But then ultimately, for Baroque music, how should we go about choosing what instrument we want to play or listen to? Well, yes, it may be that if you're really after historical authenticity, you'll want to choose the harpsichord. If you're after direct connection with audiences in big halls, probably the piano. And then don't forget, a lot of keyboard music was written for organ. I think we should start by asking these questions because it does take into account the strengths of the various instruments. But what it doesn't take into account is your strengths as a performer, your affinities, or your likes and dislikes as a listener. So for me, who wins this battle? Well, to me, it's a combination. It's what instrument plus what performer work best together to reveal the intent of the music. But I'm curious about what you think. If you had to just pick one instrument between these two or any of the others I mentioned, which one would it be and why? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye-bye.